Let's make a yarn scrap project. Today I'm going to show you how I took some scraps of yarn and made this fun shirt. If you're like me and you craft a lot, you probably have a lot of random bits of yarn laying around that you don't know what to do with and you don't want to waste. So I decided to combine mine with the shirt that I thrifted to make something new. The first thing I did was just take all my scraps out and kind of sort them by color and see what I had, because I have a lot of yarn scraps. I actually had a whole nother jar in addition to this. And then once I sorted them, I wanted to decide, okay, which colors were part of my color palette. And I also thought about the texture of the yarns too and how I could play around with that. Once I narrowed it down to some yarns that I liked, I started playing around with the layout of them. And initially I wanted to do kind of a plaid pattern with these straight lines. But as I played around with the yarn and saw what I had, I saw this really long blue piece that I decided to do this kind of zigzag curvy line with down the front of it instead. Once I had the idea of the main pattern of the shirt in my head, I started just playing around with different textures of yarn, different weights, and how I can layer them with each other just to add some interest to it. Okay, once I had the yarn where I wanted it, it was time to secure it down with some pins. And for this, I wasn't pinning down every single portion of the yarn. I was mainly focusing on where pieces of yarn intersected, so I would know where to be sure to sew down on those parts, as well as just securing the curvy parts of the yarn in parts that I knew where I needed to turn when I was sewing. And I actually decided to take off some of the smaller pieces for this first go around of sewing, especially the ones that are on the top layers, just to simplify the sewing process a little bit, because as you can see, especially with my curvy line, there was lots of maneuvering, rearranging, making sure I was in the right spot while sewing right on top of this yarn. So like I just mentioned, I'm just sewing right on top of the yarn with my thread, and it does get a little messy in process, but you just kind of have to trust it and keep going and keep track of where you are. I'm not an expert sewer by any means, so if I can do this, you can totally do this as well. And if you don't have a sewing machine, you can obviously sew by hand. It'll just take you a little bit longer. When I got done with that first round of sewing, I just went back and added my smaller pieces back in and secured those on top of the pieces where I wanted them as well. Okay, and here's what mine looks like when it's all done. I'm just trimming the extra threads from the sewing machine that were left over so it can be all ready to go. And here it is. I really like it. I think this was a fun way to use up some of my scrap yarn that I have laying around. And I think I'll definitely do this again in the future, maybe play around with a different design. I'm brainstorming some more scrap yarn projects, so follow along if you want to see those or any other craft project ideas I have.